The Kremlin has turned to threats and blackmail if these demands are not met. Russia's support from countries like North Korea does not compensate for the loss of partners at the global level.
Everything is based on fear. Russia will always try to conquer you, if not territorially, then at least within its sphere of influence. Hello and welcome to Ukraine in Flames, a special project by Ukraine Media Centre and NGO Euro-Atlantic Course. And I'm your host, Matt Wickham. And in this episode, we discuss Putin's deal with North Korea, the implications and what it really signifies. Anastasia, analyst and expert of Russian propaganda and disinformation from the UCMC team, Hybrid Warfare Analytical Group, tells of propaganda's hyping up the visit, which can hardly be classed as a successful visit, noting the support from North Korea that it doesn't even cover the loss Russia has suffered from its isolation by the West. Let's take a listen in full.
Putin's visit to North Korea was intended to indicate Russia's strong position in the war against Ukraine. Having previously put forward its demands for a ceasefire and the start of negotiations, the Kremlin has turned to threats and blackmail if these demands are not met. At a meeting with Vladimir Putin in Pyongyang, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un expressed full support for Russia's war in Ukraine and promised to strengthen strategic cooperation with Moscow. The Kremlin, in turn, emphasized mutual defense in the new treaty, which assists each country in the event of external aggression. Putin continues to use the retaliatory attack tactic, accusing the West of violating international obligations by supplying arms to Ukraine. The two leaders describe their new partnership as the strongest treaty ever to create a new multipolar world. In addition to Russia's threats to the West, threats to South Korea in the case of continued aid to Ukraine can also be seen in Russian propaganda rhetoric, as well as justifying the constant nuclear blackmail from North Korea and criticizing the sanctions against it. However, despite all declarations of strength and readiness to continue the war, the reality shows otherwise. Russia's support from countries like North Korea does not compensate for the loss of partners at the global level. Support from international organizations, economic unions, and most developed countries is gradually decreasing, weakening Russia on the diplomatic and economic fronts. Those statements about strength and readiness to continue the war are more propaganda rhetoric aimed at intimidation and disinformation than an accurate reflection of Russia's capabilities. The path to peace consists of fulfilling international norms, respecting Ukraine's sovereignty, and the cessation of aggression.
Next up is Ihor Seletskyi, director of the Euro-Atlantic Course NGO, who discusses Russia's relations with North Korea. He argues that recent agreements between the two countries are largely symbolic, and they are meant to counteract Putin's international isolation. Seletskyi also highlights how these visits aim to foster an anti-Western coalition, while inadvertently challenging China's regional influence. Let's listen. As a result, I would first consider why Putin went to Pyongyang, rather than the strategic agreement itself. There are several aspects to this. The first aspect is to show his electorate that he is not in an international isolation, even in such unusual circumstances as a visit to another dictator. However, Russians are accustomed to watching television and believing everything they hear. As a result, this will serve as a reminder to them that Putin is not isolated on the international stage. Add to this fact that a visit to Vietnam was made at the same time, and India's Prime Minister is expected to visit Moscow. That is, it's geared towards the domestic electorate. Of course, this strengthens the authoritarian coalition in some way, but for me this is a minor detail because of the authoritarian correlation, the axis of evil. Pyongyang, Beijing, Iran has already been established, and this agreement and visit adds nothing new. More importantly, it is part of the process, particularly the visit to Vietnam and the meeting with India's Prime Minister, of forming an anti-Western coalition with an anti-colonial framework. This paradigm emerged in the 1960s following the leftist revolutions, when the leftists decided, for whatever reason, that the West was to blame for everything because other countries were once their colonies. This paradigm destroys the West and prevents them from fully comprehending the world. That is why people in the West hold demonstrations in support of Hamas and support completely incomprehensible movements directed against the West. The next aspect is Western fear and destabilization. That is, Putin's visits and demonstrations are intended to show and frighten the West. In general, he is successful in this endeavour, and now we see that the ultra-left and ultra-right forces have significantly increased their representation in the European Parliament. In some countries, they have already won, and in others, they are winning. In fact, the victory of these forces is based on fear. Regarding the fear of emigration, in which Russia is heavily involved, on the fear of war in Ukraine, concerned about a potential European war, concerned about the possibility of war with Russia, everything is based on fear. That is, Putin's task is to bring into power, at least in Europe, forces willing to compromise and negotiate with him. But Western society must understand that it is impossible to reach an agreement with Russia regardless of who is present, whether Putin, Stalin, or someone else. Russia will always try to conquer you, if not territorially, then at least within its sphere of influence. This should be realized. And when you choose an ultra-left or ultra-right force and believe you're protecting yourself, you're actually jeopardizing your future. If you prioritize well-being over values, you will ultimately lose both. The only good news is that Putin has launched another black swan. What does this mean? He climbed into the Chinese garden. He did it both North Korea, with which China, despite being North Korea's primary sponsor, has tense relations, and Vietnam, with which China also has strained relations. And Putin's meeting with India's Prime Minister is, in principle, a challenge for China, because India is its main competitor, not only territorially, they have mutual claims there, but also economically, as the West is now attempting to shift production to India and establishing a trade route primarily through India. In contrast to Russia, China is too economically integrated with the West to engage in open conflict with it, so that is one of the factors. The second factor is that Russia began to pursue an independent policy, contacting both China's enemies and its satellites. This gives hope that China will be a little tougher with Russia. It's a faint hope, but it won't help Russia as much as it does now. You've been watching this special project by Ukraine Media Center and NGO Euro-Atlantic course dedicated to the Russian-Ukrainian war, Ukraine in Flames. In the description under this video, you can find more information on how you can help Ukraine fight Russian aggression. If you find our work useful, please like and share this video. Slava Ukraini!